Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, the 7 Takeaways from the 2020 DataDirect Data Connectivity Survey. My name is James Goodfellow, and I'll be your host today. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Progress DataDirect, and I'm joined by David Lotion and A.B. Reifer from Knowledge Integrity. David and A.B., thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
A little background on the speakers. David Lotion is the president over at Knowledge Integrity. He's globally recognized as an expert in business intelligence, data quality, master data management, and frequently contributing to Intelligent Enterprise DM Review and the Data Administration newsletter. A.B. Reifer is a technology and strategy leader with extensive experience in system implementations. He's a principal analyst at DecisionWorks and also serves in a senior leadership position at a data collection and survey research organization. Previously, A.B. served as the CTO of an international telecom company and is an advisory strategy consultant to a leading U.S. telecom carrier. A.B. has a master's degree in engineering from Columbia University. So a few months ago, we released the 2020 Data Connectivity Survey Report, and this is an annual report that we've been publishing for many years. And it's been a wonderful way to sort of mark the ever-changing trends in this industry. And as in prior years, the 2020 Progress Data Connectivity Report is based on solicited feedback from information management professionals about the state of their enterprise information landscape. The survey, which collected responses from over 1,800 respondents worldwide across more than 13 distinct industries, was put under the microscope to drill even further down into the data. Our goal here was, with this annual survey and report, is to seek out those patterns and insights that can provide guidance about your ongoing data management strategies, whether exploring trends across regions and industries or other factors such as laws and regulations and industry standards. And one final note, in past years, we've written the survey report internally within Progress, but for the 2020 report, we decided to engage David and A.B. from Knowledge Integrity in order to take a more objective industry approach to this data. The goal was not simply to create a report that justifies DataDirect's market focus, but to create a non-biased, vendor-agnostic evaluation of the data landscape. Now, I've personally worked with David and Knowledge Integrity for 15 years now and have always had the utmost respect for his insights into all things data. Thus, I knew that he would be the perfect fit for this task. Okay, so on to the key findings from this report. David, you and A.B. took the questions and the raw data that we generated from our survey, and these were the points that resonated most with you. On later slides, we'll dive into each one, but I did want to give just a quick sneak peek here, and then I'll ask David and A.B. to further expand on what it is that they found interesting. So, the 7 key takeaways in a nutshell: 1, moving to the cloud; 2, object storage is key; 3, the continuing need for data connectivity; 4, data quality is king; 5, system diversity is normalizing; 6, the adoption of NoSQL is still early; and 7, data protection in the cloud. So with that said, let's turn it over to our guests. David, let's talk key takeaway number 1 here. What was it about migration to the cloud that you and A.B. found most interesting, or one of the most interesting parts of this data?
Thanks, James, and thanks for the introduction and all the nice words. What we found real interesting about this was that in almost all of the choices that the respondents were given, there was some aspect of migrating applications from an on-premises environment to the cloud that was critical as part of modernizing their environments. And if you look at the results here, you'll see that when the question about the percentages of modernization projects came up, the most frequently answered selection was cloud migration and going to one of the major cloud service providers, either Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. And then the second was legacy systems migration. And what's interesting is that there seems to be a conflation between the term migration and modernization, and it comes up over and over again when it comes to talking about moving to the cloud. And what's really important to think about moving forward is that there needs to be a difference between thinking about what modernization actually means and what migration means, because it's very easy to look at taking an entire full database stack that's sitting on an on-premises system and just pure and simply replicating that hardware configuration using a cloud-based computing forum or computing instance, and then lifting the software stack and shifting it over to that replicated hardware configuration. That you could call that migration, but I wouldn't call that modernization, because after you've invested all this effort in trying to recreate the stage for implementing that system, you can go through months, maybe even a year, moving an application, and yet finding that that application, once it's moved to the cloud, doesn't run any faster, doesn't run any better, doesn't provide any of the expected scalability that you might be getting, expecting to be getting from cloud computing. So I would say that that's the number one thing in, reflecting back over the last couple of months and talking to a bunch of people about their concepts about modernization. Avi, you've got some thoughts about that as well, right?
Yeah, so some points to, really emphasize that is, we see, well, initially, as David said, the original approach that people were thinking about was, how do I reduce my hardware costs, or, how do I scale more easily by leveraging somebody else's environment in the cloud? That's really started to change. People are really finding different ways to take advantage of cloud technologies. Obviously, many are aware that AWS, Azure, and these others are offering all kinds of different services. So things now like Lambda, these serverless technologies, you're beginning to really see a tick up on that. People are really beginning to use that. And then there's this transformation now that we begin to see, and it'll be interesting to see in the next survey, how this plays out. But you're beginning to see organizations that not only are they deploying their applications into the cloud, but they're actually doing all their development in the cloud. They're using tools like Azure, Microsoft provides all their development tools. You can do your entire development process in the cloud. Your desktop is basically in the cloud. Your source code repository, all your build tools. And so you basically log in there and you kind of do the entire soup to nuts. Begin my development, all my deployments through development, testing, and then into production in a cloud environment, and my code executes in the cloud. So this has really become transformational, and that's really what we're seeing. Just one of the other things, David, if I could, I just wanted to point out that we also saw in some of the data that for government, that this wasn't as high as I think the legacy, conversion. I suspect, based on some of the things I'm seeing in the industry, that this has now become something that the government themselves are also really pushing hard on. Many of the agencies have their own cloud environments. They've set up a cloud environment either in AWS or in Azure. And they're looking for their vendors to actually, in some cases, do the development in that environment, but certainly deploy their applications in those environments that then the government is able to manage from a security perspective and make sure meet, the FISMA requirements they have. So even, in that area, I think that, for that sector, the government sector, I think while they may have been a little skittish because of security and privacy in the past, looks like they're actually, in my view, from my vantage point, really moving in that direction fairly quickly as well.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing to that, which is one of the things that you mentioned before, AB, about being able to actually move your development to the cloud. I think that also is a revolution in the development of applications, which is whether an organization would prefer to migrate an existing application or to do net new development in the cloud. And so there's differing thoughts about this, but also the way that the cloud is configured with the types of different services. And this was also pointed out in the slide that, the graph that we see here on the left about microservices architecture, is that the ability to leverage microservices and migrating I'd rather say adoption of the cloud actually we believe this is going to lead into more net new development purely on the cloud.
So let me ask this. If the three of us are sitting here, 5 years from now or 7 years from now, are we talking about how on-prem has completely gone away? Like, do you foresee a future where on-prem is a thing of the past and that everything is solely in the cloud?
So, I think it'll depend on the industry. I mean, certainly a lot of folks are moving, a good portion of what they have to the cloud. In many cases, they're keeping some things on-prem. Maybe it's the orchestration, where we talk about, an end-to-end service. Maybe some of the orchestration functions, exist in the cloud. And it's part of the reason, or one of the things we'll talk about later, is connectivity becomes so important, being able to manage the connectivity of the various environments you have from one centralized point. Will everyone move to the cloud? I don't know. I suspect that some will keep some assets in the cloud, particularly ones that are really business differentiators or things, that they might be really concerned about a competitor getting their hands on. But I think you'll see more and more things move to the cloud. And what will remain will be a much, much smaller footprint than what we have today.
Excellent. And that's probably something that we'll also talk about when we talk security later in the presentation. All right. So, AB, let's start with you here. Key takeaway number 2, object storage is key. Tell me why.
Sure. So, what we're finding is there's certainly convenience in being able to work with data that's not necessarily in a structured format. And we're seeing a lot of people beginning to try to do some of that. And what it does is allows people to create their data lakes in the cloud that could be a companion and sort of integrate with their data warehouses or other cloud-based databases that they have. One of the problems, though, is that it used to be that this data is somewhat ungoverned, and it makes it more difficult to use. So what we're beginning now to see is that there are a number of vendors who are providing solutions. And I think David has a lot of exposure to this sort of thing, where they're providing governance solutions and tools to make it easier and to sort of meld together, your unstructured data along with structured data that you might have. So ultimately that allows people to start really taking advantage of moving object type data, unstructured data into the cloud and begin to use unstructured data more easily. David, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the things that you might have had exposure to with that.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we can add to this graphic here. One is there's a trend which you started pointing to, which is the moving away from purely having structured data assets. And so if you look at the evolution of the data lake, it really has transitioned from being a kind of a place to just dump data sets that anybody feels compelled to want to be able to share or be able to use. And a lot of that was driven by the scalability and elasticity of cloud computing services that allowed anybody basically to be able to get access to a high performance computing platform, which then opened up the door for data scientists to be able to run more complicated and more complex advanced analytics that were not limited to the slicing and dicing that you get with a traditional data warehouse or OLAP environment. So once you open up that door, then of course what you just referred to, which is this ungoverned mishmash of data assets that nobody really knows what's in there, and nobody knows how to use it, and nobody knows how to interpret it, and there's no framework for acquisition and management of those data assets. And essentially that can become a swamp instead of a lake. So what you just described is that there's a growing array of vendors. Some of them call their tools data ops tools. There's different suites of products that are used for doing data cataloging, for doing governance, for doing stewardship, for managing lineage, all that to manage and oversee the acquisition and consumption of a broader variety of data, not just structured data, but semi-structured and unstructured data. But then the result of that is that if we've, and this would refer back to what we saw in the prior slide, if organizations are migrating off their data-centric environments to the cloud, it's not really the cloud, it's actually the clouds, because an organization will have one group going to an Amazon, but they'll have another group within the same company that's moving to Azure, and another group that is making use of services made available by Google, plus 6 or 7 other major cloud service providers, and now all of a sudden I've got data assets that span a multi-cloud environment, and so the ability to layer on top of this object storage and provide accessibility and queryability and analytical ability to the collection of those data assets together and treating that as a kind of a hybrid data warehouse or a hybrid analytics environment. That's where we're starting to see a lot of innovation. And I think that if I were to think about where, James, you asked that question before, if we're sitting 5 years from now, what would we be thinking about? I think part of it wouldn't be is the on-premises platform dead, but rather how advanced are the abilities to completely make transparent the underlying storage structures or infrastructure for enabling downstream data consumers and analysts and data scientists and other personas that are the data consumers. So I think that's why when we start looking at object storage, it means the alternative to a relational database system as opposed to just the specific object storage service that is the one that is most frequently referred to, whether it's Amazon S3 or whether it's the Azure, I guess they call it object store, or they've got their each vendor's got their own name for their object storage, but there's actually going to be a whole array of different levels of storage with different tiered capabilities and levels of service.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, one of the things that you see now is everyone's becoming sort of a data scientist, data analyst, and S3, it's just easy to use. I mean, I don't know if hopefully folks have had a chance to use S3, but it's you basically can put stuff there, and you can easily access those things in a variety of the different tools and technologies that are now available, just through a fairly simple API, call to it. Python and R and Spark, all these technologies, tools and technologies for analytics, just have very easy, ways of calling to write to or to pull from S3, just as an example. Happens that S3 is also, now so popular that there are tools that allow you to treat your own local data stores as an S3 bucket. So you could just point your code to a local data store, and then when it's time to move your code, or just if you want to just have multiple places that you're pulling code from, you can use the S3 protocol to pull in your code. And then you have with file formats like Parquet and Avro, you have relatively easy ways to do queries on these on these flat file, plain old file data files that have some metadata in them. So it makes things a lot easier, just from that perspective. And so as a result, this is becoming quite a bit more popular for people to be able to use.
Yeah, and I really agree with that whole idea of with the citizen data scientist, right? The fact that the power that used to be in a database administrator's hands is now in all of our within all of our grasp.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, David. As an aside, is I mean, you literally wrote the book on master data management some years back. So as we've seen, CDI migrate to MDM, migrate to, we talked about data catalogs. We talked, there are customer data platforms. There seem to be a lot of different flavors of what essentially is the same thing, which is a place, whether it's a data lake or whatever you call it, a place where it's just, as data explodes, a central place to keep it all and a central way to access it. But is it the same thing? Is it? And is it making it easier to get a master data view, so to speak?
So I would rethink this whole concept of a single repository and instead think about information sharing as a way of alerting your constituents as to the assets that are available and how they can be used. Because I think one of the flaws of the whole master data approach, it was the attempt to create a single unique record, record for quote unquote single source of truth. And in reality, there is no single source of truth because every data asset has different context and different rules and different semantics that lends a different, a subjective truth to every perspective on the subjects that are within the data asset itself. So if I'm a data scientist and I want to interpret, or I want to use an interpretation based on what I believe to be in 3 or 4 different sources, the ability to have accessibility to the data in its original form, as opposed to being told that I can only get access to data that's been processed through somebody else's lenses. I think that's part of what frees those data scientists to be able to be a little more sophisticated with the types of analyses that they do. And so what changes is that we no longer would look at this as being a repository of a single source of truth, but rather accessibility to the sources to be able to provide auditable lineages and integration processes and data preparation processes that can be inspected by others, that can lead to other sophisticated insights that can lead to profitable behaviors.
Nice. I like it. It's the idea of objective data.
Yeah, you might call it that.
All right. Moving on to key takeaway number 3: continuing need for connectivity. Which David, why don't we throw this one over to you to start out?
Yeah. So when we look at this slide, I think that this informs us a little bit about the audience somewhat, because the concept of connectivity, there's 2 facets to that. There's the technical aspects of connectivity, and then there's the conceptual aspects of connectivity. And the issue here is that if we look at the results in the context of the other questions that are being asked, which a large amount of which have to do with data integration and migration of data and applicationware to a cloud environment, that part of what we look at here is who reflects upon infrastructure and who reflects upon context. So when we see this, I think a lot of people answered this, from a personal perspective. How am I specifically connecting cloud applications to on-premises data? How am I making use of the underlying networking capacity to do this in a way that that provides a level of protection against unauthorized access, but it doesn't really cover the true massive scope of a need for connectivity, especially again in the face of what we continue to see to expand as the trends, which is not just moving from on-prem to a cloud service provider, but on-prem to multiple cloud service providers. And so I think that there's an opportunity when we send out our next set of survey questions to reflect on what's a better way of asking this question to provide additional alternatives and options that better reflect a emerging heterogeneous broad scale network that doesn't just include on-prem versus cloud, but on-prem, cloud, software as a service vendors, platform as a service vendors, IoT devices, et cetera. I mean, AB, you're more of a networking person than I am.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I always look at connectivity as a thing that knits everything together. I mean, particularly in these hybrid environments, everything now we're talking about is hybrid. Things are all over the place. And so, key here is obviously privacy, right? Security, right? We want to be sure, and holistically now security is important. You pull all this data together from a variety of different places, and while it's not necessarily a connectivity issue, one of the things that you kind of have to think about is what are you revealing by now pulling all this data from disparate places and knitting them together, and what do you find out that maybe could be could raise to a privacy issue. But from a connectivity perspective, when these things are diverse, they're all over the place, and you're connecting to a variety of different networks and data sources, speed is key, right? Particularly if I'm trying to pull this all together into a single or some kind of a holistic solution. So having tools to be able to monitor the security, the reliability of those end-to-end connections. These things are passing through a variety of different firewalls, and so you want to be sure that you have. It's important if the plumbing doesn't work, if there's either a leak, that's kind of bad. That maybe is a security problem. If there's a break, your service is halted. So, it means for the importance in being able to have secure, highly reliable, and fast network connections, and tools to manage those things. I suspect is going to become more and more important as we see these hybrid solutions, permeate out there.
AB, is real time realistic?
I've seen some solutions that try to do it. I mean, these things, what is real time, right? So, I think that, solutions in seconds, yeah, probably. But like immediacy, like literally immediacy, the kinds of things that you might expect to see from a solution that's just running on one server, where everything is, sort of in that compartmentalized there. I think you're not going to see. I think these things, there's flow, and they're going through a variety of different places, particularly also if things aren't on the edge. And so now you're having to reach deep into the network to find certain things. These things, they do take a little bit of time, and then that all adds up, in a holistic solution.
Now,
So
on the other hand, you might look at that and say, well, what could be pushed out to the edge should be pushed out to the edge. And so if you can leverage your ability to accumulate transaction or event data at a centralized point, say on a cloud environment, do your analytics, create your analytical models that then can help in automating decision making processes that actually could be seeded down at the edge. So there, what you can do is you could leverage your infrastructure to get the right kinds of componentry that then get pushed much closer to where the events are actually happening. And so then you've got a much better opportunity for doing real time, because your intelligence is sitting out actually where the data is, instead of pulling the data to where your intelligence is.
So it's effective real time, if not actual real time.
Yeah.
Excellent. AB, let's talk about data quality. Tell me why data quality is and remains sort of a top tier consideration.
Actually, this one I found interesting because, and it makes perfect sense. What we found in this report in the data is that data quality was, I think, the highest. Yeah, it's the highest rated challenge. But if you go back to the previous year, I think even the last 2 years, you'll find that integration, of cloud data, across on-prem cloud data and on-premise data was pretty higher than quality, as well as data spread across an increasing number of data sources was also higher. And so what's the story? What's going on? Well, it makes sense because the last couple of years of again, hybrid solutions, pulling data from a variety of different places. That was the challenge. How are we going to do this? We got to do this. Now I got this data and I'm pulling it together from a variety of different sources. But wait a minute, ugh. The governance of those data are different. The quality metrics of those data might have been different. So now I've got a new challenge. What's the new challenge I got to reckon with is now that I've kind of figured out how to pull it together, I also got to figure out how to make sure there's consistency in the way those things were managed, and that the quality of what I'm pulling together from these variety of sources is actually where I need it to be for it to be valuable for the solution I'm providing. So that's the new challenge, because the other ones, it appears, have for the most part been solved, or continue to be solved, but they're well along the way. And now we have this new realization of, okay, with having solved those problems, I got to figure out how I can ensure that there's consistency in what I'm now pulling from different places. So, that's kind of my read on what we're seeing in that, and that's why it's important. It's actually grown in importance, and it really does need to be because if people are going to be relying on these data solutions, they need to know that the quality is there. There's organizations that do data collection and pull data from a variety of sources to make public policy decisions. So the importance of data quality, of course, is something that we cannot, it really can't be compromised on. So that's kind of my read on this. I don't know, David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly agree with you about the as the volumes increase, and so we've got increasing data volumes, we've got increasing capabilities for aggregating data or accumulating data from a variety of different sources, and we've got the integration across the different boundaries. And so that certainly opens up more opportunities for raising questions about the quality of that data. I think data quality has never gone away as a problem. It's been a problem for 20 plus years. It's been a problem for many more than that. I mean, let me rephrase that. I've been working in data quality for 20 plus years. But I think what also is starting to reinforce this is, again, the what we talk about, this concept of data democratization, making more data available to a broader variety of downstream data consumers, many through self-service, a lot of them through direct accessibility to data, say sitting in a data lake, or self-service access to a data warehouse. And that more people are looking at the data, so more people are given the opportunity to be critical about it, and then that says, well, now we have more people raising questions about the validity or the trustworthiness or the usability of that data. And so data quality is no longer just somebody spelled a name wrong, but rather, is there inconsistency across multiple sources? Well, you're more likely to have inconsistency across multiple sources as you have more sources. Data uncertainty, ambiguous data certainly is an issue. A large part of this also has to do with the proliferation of APIs and publicly available data streams, many of which have little or no governance at all. So there's data pouring through these real-time feeds, but there's absolutely no validation of that information in any part of the way when it moves from point A to point Z. So I don't think this is going to change. I think data quality is always going to be a problem, and the more people who answer these surveys, the more respondents are going to tell you that they have issues with data quality.
David, if we look at the three pillars of sort of an organizational change or governance, it's people, process, and technology. Is data quality, does it fall into any one of those buckets as sort of the key culprit, or the key area to address it, or is it really sort of, does it remain a combination of the three?
It's kind of interesting that you asked that question. I mean, I think it's not a technology. It is I guess I would call it a socio-technical process because given good technologies that individuals can apply to solve certain types of problems, they'd still have to be essentially engaged as part of the holistic system view, which says that the people have to be involved in making decisions and doing the right thing. So I don't think it's a technology. I think it is, if anything, I would say it's a collection of processes that need human engagement to promote and internalize within the organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. All right. Key takeaway number 5, system diversity. So, David, how's that normalizing?
So this is an interesting question because I think there wasn't enough differentiation in the way the question was posed as to whether people were whether the question was focusing on individual, say, desktop machines or any type of computing environment or server environment. And so it's interesting to kind of reflect on this. When we look at this, we see that the lion's share of respondents said Windows, but that might just be because they have a Windows desktop that's sitting on their desk or a laptop, and that's what they see as their system or their platform, as opposed to thinking about, well, when I log into the network in my organization, what am I actually connecting to? So it's actually, I would say it's somewhat comforting to see Linux being the number 2 response there, and it's funny because if you look at these alternatives, I mean, AIX, HPUX, Mac OS X, Solaris, those are all Unix derived operating systems. So if you were to add them up, it essentially would be balancing out on the Windows side. But what I think was interesting is that in the last year or so, there have been new services that I've seen that different cloud service providers are offering, which is the ability to create workspaces that are mimicking desktop systems, while at the same time you've got those same cloud providers, when they launch their computing instances, they give you the alternative of having these different operating systems as well. So I can look back in terms of my own experience. I am more frequent user of the Amazon Web Services, and when I go to launch an EC2 instance, I'm typically launching a Linux instance. Mm-hmm. However, in the last month or two, I've launched a workspace that is a Windows workspace, which is almost identical to having an i5 desktop, except that they're both cloud services. Neither of them are actual real machines that are sitting on a desk. So when we say system diversity is normalizing, and we couple that again with a lot of the other answers that we saw in different questions, it's really what would be interesting to see or to look at in a year is when people are launching compute instances on the different cloud platforms, what OS are they using, or what platform are they using, or is it going to be a completely new one that doesn't even exist today, or is it going to start converging on Linux because that seems to be the default that most of the cloud vendors are providing. So, Abe, what are you saying?
Yeah, so I agree. And one of the things that I noticed in the information and the data from the reports is that we're also seeing that a large number of the respondents indicated they use, I think it was like in the 50%, some use both Linux and Windows. I suspect what this is about, and it's really what David was saying. A lot of these cloud services, certainly when you're spinning up an operating system, there, and I don't know if it's still true, but it used to be a lower cost to run a Linux environment than to run a Windows for licensing reasons. But you also have a lot of containerization these days. Folks are deploying containers, and containers, like a lot of these appliances, run versions of Linux often. Like for containers, often people use something called BusyBox or Alpine, which are very thin versions of they're small layers of the operating system, so that they're light. And so a lot of things are moving in that direction for that reason, because these are light operating systems that can do all the kinds of things you need the operating system to do for the service. So if you're running a service, a stateless service that really just needs a very small execution engine to do what it does, you're more likely going to end up running something like a thin Linux layer in there than you would something that's more beefy and uses more resources than you might need for your particular purpose. So I think that's a good part of the reason that we're seeing both of these things at that level. And I suspect, like David said, that we'll be seeing, with these appliances, more use of Linux, even for people who don't necessarily have a lot of familiarity with the Linux operating systems.
Yeah, and I think you guys are right in that, as we ask this question in the future, we should probably sort of normalize around all of the Unix-based systems just to get a true sort of apples to apples comparison.
Yep.
Okay, adoption of NoSQL is still early, so it sounds like maybe you guys were surprised by this.
Yeah. I would say sort of. It's funny, I should just mention that, some of the analysis we did of the data for this study, for this report, we actually used MongoDB. So I kind of found it a little funny. It was almost like a little recursive in here. But I think that it is true that people aren't really jumping on the NoSQL bandwagon as quickly as some might have thought. And my thought is for the following reason. At first, it seems like putting things in a unstructured data in a NoSQL database is relatively easy. It's like a JSON string, or it's fairly straightforward. You don't have to have much structure, and so it's easy to get some things into a database. But one of the things you find is that getting things out is actually often more difficult, because you don't always know exactly what's in there. It's almost like, you got a lake with all kinds of different fish, and you have no idea what kind of fish are in there, and you don't know what you're fishing for. And if you're fishing for a particular kind of fish, you better know what the criteria are associated with that fish that you want to pull out. So when you want to write a query and pull things out, you've got to be, very, very disciplined in terms of knowing what you've put in there and what the criteria are, what the tags are that you're going to be running your queries against, and what nuances you have in the data. So I think in the end, the end result of it is it's actually more difficult than people tend to think. It's sold on the premise of no structure, easy to put in, really doesn't require much thought at the outset. But I think after the fact, when you want to use it, and you want to use it with quality and have assurance that you're pulling out the information that you're targeting and intend to pull out, you have to have the discipline to have captured somewhere what you put in there, or to have had some level of structure, some level of consistency while putting things in there. So that's kind of my guess. I mean, I think once you start having to have a level of structure, I think people naturally then begin to think more relational again and more structured, and say, okay, if I'm going to have to deal with that, I might as well just go back to what was a relational database. Plus, I think just for all the years that there have been relational databases, I think people generally just have more experience and an understanding of how to use them. This is a new technology. It's a mindset change, and you really have to get there both from a discipline perspective to use it successfully, and it takes some work. So I think that's a big part of why this hasn't taken off. I still think there's hope for this, because I did find that once you have that discipline, there's a lot you can do. And then, of course, there are folks who work in the geospatial space, or folks who use things like, solar for indexing. There's definitely place for these sorts of things, for document stores and those kinds of things. And that's where it continues to be very useful, I believe. David, any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually, I don't disagree with anything you said. I also wonder whether the results here are skewed by the audience that was responding to the question, because there are a lot of projects that I've seen that are trying to make use of NoSQL because of their expectation for a little less harsh requirements for control, and its alignment with the agile development methodology. So I'm curious if we had expanded out the pool of respondents, whether we would have seen some significant changes or differences in the answers here, or maybe even if we rephrased the question and modified the potential answers, only because these are not the only NoSQL options, although Mongo seems to be pretty popular among the NoSQL ones. But there are a lot of systems that are out there that are kind of based on using a NoSQL database as its underlying data management engine. That a number of people may not even realize that if they're using, for example, they're using DataStax. DataStax is based on Cassandra. DataStax was not one of the options here, but Cassandra is. If somebody's using DataStax and they didn't see it on their list, they wouldn't be able to select it. And then also the kind of diminishing. I mean, I'm kind of not surprised at diminishing references to HBase here as well. But again, I'm looking forward to seeing how we're going to pose this question in the next survey and what kind of answers we're going to get.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I think hopefully we can address both. We can reconfigure the question, and we can also reach a broader audience to try to get a more representative sample. All right. Final takeaway: data protection in the cloud. All right, David, you want to take the first stab at this?
Yeah, absolutely. And the high percentage of respondents talking about GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation for the European Union, not surprising. That was going into effect around the time that the survey was done, so completely to be expected. I think what's interesting is that I think data security is one of those issues that has prevented organizations from feeling comfortable moving to the cloud. And I would say that the cloud service providers have recognized this and have become much more diligent in providing capabilities that support data security and data protection. And I think the issue largely is around the fact that perimeter security, which is what IT security traditionally has been, is trying to keep people out. But clearly, if you read the newspaper or you watch the news and you see about every other day there's another massive data breach, that doesn't work. And so it's really not. It's not really solely about perimeter security, but largely more about data protection, and data protection not just against external breaches, but against any type of vulnerability where an unauthorized party can get access to data they are not supposed to be able to see.
Right.
So when it comes to something like you've got a alphabet stew here of regulation abbreviations, many of which people may not even be aware of or what they are. And so absolutely, everybody knows that they're doing GDPR. Everybody knows that there are data privacy laws. I'm a little surprised at I would have thought there'd be a much higher percentage for many of these things. But I would rephrase this in our upcoming survey. I'd change it to not talk about the regulations as the only question that we're asking about data protection, but rather about the balancing a question like this with another question that asks about, do you understand how access control is managed for your cloud data assets? Do you have a mechanism for harmonizing data protection policies across that multi-cloud or a hybrid environment? Those types of things, and I think we'll see a much higher percentage of respondents that will be giving a positive response to that kind of a question.
Yeah, I agree. That was, I think that facet of the question was one that, we should consider for the next go around to get a sense of what people really do understand in terms of how they do manage security, how the security of their assets are managed in a cloud environment. I think that would be an interesting thing to see.
In your own sort of personal opinions, is the fear around cloud security founded or well-founded, as opposed to is it more a fear of the things that are new and unknown?
That's kind of an interesting question. I mean, I'd probably say that at the beginning it was a fear of the unknown. I would say that fear has become more acute for organizations that are kind of once bitten, twice shy. Any organization that's been subject to a breach is going to be a lot more careful about what it is that they're trying to do. But I think organizations don't, or many people in organizations don't really even understand the nature of data protection, and so having a more structured approach to talking about data policies as opposed to talking about protection. See, one is talking about the mechanism by which you describe what your requirements are going to be, while the other one talks about how those requirements would be implemented. And I think that it's incumbent upon organizations to get a better idea about how they are structuring the policy management. And I think once you start seeing that, you'll have a lot more engagement in terms of understanding how data protection works.
Agreed.
Okay, so that's 7 key takeaways, and I'm glad that we got through them all. Before we go any further, and I know that we're sort of running up against time, so I hope we'll be able to get to the Q&A. Before we move into that, I did want to put out a request, and we've talked about this a bit here and there on these slides. In the next few weeks, each of the attendees from today's webinar are going to receive an invitation to take part in the 2021 Data Connectivity Survey. And so now's your chance as participants to have your voice heard on these and other relevant topics across the data world. So when you get that invitation, please take a few moments just to respond, and we'll come back here sort of same time, same channel, and we'll talk through how things have changed over the past year and how things are moving forward with David and Aby. I want to move into questions. I know we're close to out of time. If I could just ask one of you each of you one question, and then the rest will sort of respond to offline after the fact. AB, did it surprise you that we didn't hear as much about the big data or Hadoop in this survey? And is it, was that a surprise? Because several questions like this have come in, and I'm wondering how that struck you.
So was it a surprise? I guess I think we kind of spoke about some of the alternatives in here, and that's probably why it wasn't so much of a surprise. I think what we're seeing, Hadoop, it's complicated. You try to spin up a Hadoop cluster, it's really tough. Managing HDFS, the files, it's complicated. And then there's things like S3 we spoke about earlier, right? Where you could just, easily put things there and access them. And then there are tools like, Spark, that provide you, and Spark is, was some of the distributions of Hadoop was included, but there are a variety of tools now that folks are able to use that provide, the analysis capabilities, the big data capabilities in many ways of what you would have seen in the Hadoop solutions. I spent some time a few years ago with a group trying to, get a Hadoop implementation going, and it took quite a bit of time and quite a bit of money. There were a lot of, it was constantly difficult to keep current. And this is, in the days of both CDH and HDP, separate companies at the time, and it was a lot. It was a lot of effort. And so my view is, a lot of people are doing a lot of things these days with some of these, cloud-based solutions that don't necessarily need, maybe, some of the Hadoop solutions are included, but S3 and tools like, Spark really get you a long ways there to do much of the kinds of things you might want to do. David, I don't know if you've had any experience with those,
I think you started pointing out, the fact that Cloudera and Hortonworks, they used to be separate, they merged. I think they all recognize that the winds were blowing further away from independent Hadoop implementations, and now we're seeing much more of a platform. The products that are coming out of companies like those, and their competitors are really platform information management tools, not just a service model for open source Hadoop, but rather the entire ecosystem around the end-to-end provision of data for the purposes of downstream use or downstream analytics. So I think you're right. Hadoop was complicated. If you were going to be doing it in your own environment, you were more likely investing a huge amount of effort and resources in buying hardware and trying to keep that up to date, and that becomes relatively obsolete when you can do the same thing on the cloud, and all you have to do is just go to a console and click a couple of buttons, and now you've got a similarly sized a cluster that can do the same thing that you were trying to do, with your whole big team and your whole big data center and your massive amounts of processors. So I think we'll continue to see Hadoop diminish. I don't think big data is going to be diminished. I think that we're never going to see the end of that.
As I think we're going to have to end it there. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. David and AB, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all your hard work on putting this report together. And I'm really excited about moving forward with the 2021 survey. I think that now we have a lot more expectation of what we think we can get out of people based on how we word the questions. But thank you so much for today. And to everybody who joined in, for myself and for the speakers and on behalf of Progress and DataDirect, thank you so much for joining. You'll be hearing from us shortly if you asked a question and we didn't get to it. Otherwise, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.